What do you think the significance of this ruling was?
Well, I actually think the significance of it is much broader than the specific targeting of the issues in this case. Judge Wilkinson, who's well known as a very conservative judge on the Fourth Circuit, wrote what it will go down as, I think, one of the most powerful recitations of making the case for the rule of law that we have seen. And yes, he chastised the Trump administration and obviously says what we all know, which is facilitate requires you to actually do something, not just claim that you have no power. But the way that he breaks down the separation of powers and the rule of law and explains why it is so important is a lesson that every American should take, and every American should read this opinion. It's short. It is remarkable. 7
pages. It's worth the read. In it, Judge Wilkinson says, quote, "If today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon its political enemies?"
So this was a shot at Donald Trump, in my view, because the two hypothetical examples he used are two things that Donald Trump has discussed, talked about, or actually done. He has mentioned recently this week sending American citizens to this torture chamber in El Salvador, which, by the way, that prison would be unconstitutional in this country because of cruel and unusual punishment. And then he also references that Trump directed the Department of Justice to criminally investigate Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor because they spoke out against Donald Trump. So these are not just normal law school hypotheticals. These were very specifically targeted at Donald Trump as a warning shot to simmer down here because you are far, far, far out over your Democratic skis.
There were some Republicans and supporters of President Trump who kind of dined out for days on the word facilitate and suggested that the word facilitate didn't mean they had to take active steps here. And really, Judge Wilkinson seemed to make clear he thinks they need to do stuff to get Abrego Garcia back, take action. How significant is that?
Well, it's especially significant because there's a very simple action that pretty clearly would get Abrego Garcia back. The administration is paying El Salvador to hold all of these individuals. If they were to stop paying for Abrego Garcia, even the El Salvadorian vice president said to Senator Chris Van Hollen, well, we're keeping him because they're paying us to keep him. So stop paying him, and then they're likely to send him back. They haven't even done that, which is the most basic thing that they can do. So I think where Judge Wilkinson is coming from is what we all see, which is, first of all, and he talks about this, and I think it's powerful, which is, yes, there's the legal analysis, facilitate versus effectuate, and what do they actually have to do, and whether judges can infringe on foreign power. Yes, that is all important. But let's just talk about the basic morality. And Judge Wilkinson talks about that. He says, you have admitted that you were wrong to remove him and deport him. Why will you not make that wrong right? It's just basic morality, basic human decency to let him come back. Now, he very well, as Judge Wilkinson says, very well may be an MS-13 gang member. But that's the point of due process, which is that the government can then go to the court, the immigration court, provide whatever evidence it has, and if it meets a preponderance of the evidence, then he can be determined to be a member of MS-13, and now that it is a foreign terrorist organization, they can change this withholding order and allow him to be deported. But they have to go through that process, just like every single person in this country needs to be able to go through that process. Otherwise, we do not have a system based on the rule of law. We have a dictatorship where the king can just decide whether or not the law applies and to whom.
You mentioned Chris Van Hollen, senator from Maryland, who went down to try to even just speak to Mr. Abrego Garcia, and he was not allowed to. I spoke to other Democratic members of the House, your colleagues in the House, who are about to go down. I guess my question to you is for what? I mean, what are they going to get that Van Hollen didn't get? What's the point now?
Well, I thought that Van Hollen going down there because Mr. Abrego Garcia lives in his state made some sense, and we got a lot of information out of it. I mean, the conversation that he had with the El Salvadorian vice president exposed to us that they have no evidence that Abrego Garcia is connected to MS-13, and that they would likely return him if we, the government, stop paying for him. So I think there's a possibility of getting more information out there, and also to raise and amplify the issue, which is top of mind for many people right now. And it's not that anyone is defending Mr. Abrego Garcia as whether he should remain here or not. It is just due process is so fundamental to our system of government that, and without it, and this is just such a good example of why, because if he had due process, he would not have been removed. Then they would have had to go through the process of proving it. And this is why due process matters, so you don't make mistakes like this, and so that you do have a neutral arbiter that decides the law, not the executive branch, which obviously has their own policy and political interests at play and needs to be checked and balanced by the courts.
I want to ask you one question a little bit off this subject. It has to do with Senator Lisa Murkowski, independent from Alaska, although she does vote with the Republicans in the Senate. She's been critical of President Trump at times, and she was asked what she would say to people who are afraid or represent those who are afraid right now of just the politics at play. Listen to what she said.
We are all afraid. Okay? It's quite a statement. I'm oftentimes very anxious myself about using my voice because retaliation is real, and that's not right.
She's anxious about using her voice because the retaliation is real, she says. Is that something that you can perceive in the House, maybe among some of your Republican colleagues?
I have not heard it directly, but the fact that Donald Trump rules by threat and fiat has come out and has a real chilling effect on members of Congress, and mostly Republicans. And Mitt Romney had a whole chapter in his book about how a Republican colleague of his told him that he changed his vote because he was fearful for his family's safety. And you now have Donald Trump, who has a cult following behind him and threatens people, attacks them if they cross him, as well. And now he released and pardoned a militia of January 6th criminal convicts who will do anything he says. And so there's got to be thoughts of this. And let me just explain for a minute why that's so dangerous. Okay, you might say, all right, well, that's, a hazard of the job. But think about whether any of us want to vote a certain way, but because we fear for our personal safety or our family's personal safety, we decide to vote differently. We are no longer representing our constituents. We are representing something else more like the person, the bully who's threatening us. That is how Vladimir Putin operates. That is how Viktor Orban operates. That is how dictators operate. And that's how our democracy dies. Because if you are not voting based on the merits and the substance and your voters and constituents, then you are not a representative elected official, and you are not part of a truly democratic body.